All right, guys, first thing we're going to address on this is the fuel system. Haven't checked the tank yank. The gas is probably at least 2 years old. We're going to take off the feed and return line that are underneath this air cleaner. There's 2 10s on either side of the air cleaner, and then we'll get down to the actual fuel lines underneath. Once we get these lines disconnected, we'll put the car up in the air, we'll go down to the back, and we're going to take a look at the fuel filter, the accumulator, and the fuel pump. We're going to make sure that all of those are in good working order. I bought a new fuel filter and I bought a new accumulator. I do believe that that's the cause of the hot start issue, is why this thing was sidelined to begin with. In the back here, you have your feed and return lines, 2 17s. We'll disconnect those and go to the back, like I said. And we'll be able to blow these lines out, make sure that we have fresh gas coming up here to the fuel distributor. So those are those 2 lines. We'll go around to the back. All right, guys, we're in the back of the SL now. You'll see the fuel pump on the bottom looks to be new. There's the filter, and tucked up in the back is the accumulator. We're going to take this shield off and carefully try and work these lines off of the fuel pump. There's a line coming down from the fuel tank that's braided. We have our old friends here, the mud daubers. So I'm going to start working on taking all this apart. 10 millimeter.
All right, we're on the bench here. I've taken apart the fuel filter, the accumulator, and this is where the fuel pump goes, inside of a nice little protective coating. Missing bolt here and bolt here. Previous owner must have been through this and did not put the bolts back, or they are likely just corroded and broke off. So we're gonna kind of mock everything up here. And like I said, we're gonna put 12 volts to this pump, make sure that it works. And then we'll start going through and replacing these lines that are absolutely horrible and falling apart and broken. And we don't want to put any of this trash back into the fuel system that we're trying our best to clean. You'll see that there's the original fuel filter, made in Spain, Bosch. This is probably came with the car and has never been changed. There's the accumulator. This is what we likely suspect was causing the hot start issues and ultimately sidelined the car. So we've got a new one of those installed. And again, we're gonna get some new fuel lines between all of these and replace all of the banjo fittings that are connecting them onto this right-hand side. All right, I've got the fuel pump mounted in the vise here. I've got my jump box here, the jumper cable leads. We're gonna just hook this up to 12 volts, see if this fuel pump comes on. That way we don't put it back in the car and see if we have a problem. Should hear sparks, see sparks, or see it turn on. Dead. So we'll have to get a new fuel pump and then continue on with our troubleshooting here.
All right, guys, so while we're waiting for the fuel pump to come in, should be here sometime later today, seeing that there's an actual access port on the top of the fuel tank, but you have to take the hard top off, put the soft top up, and there's a big plug at the top. We should be able to look down inside the tank and kind of see a screen that's down there, see if that's clogged or if there's any kind of debris in there that we can either blow out, clean out, or maybe put some fresh gas in, kind of mix it around and then drain that out. But I'm probably gonna fast forward through this part. There's a couple bolts inside. You have to use these special Mercedes tools to unlatch it and get the top off. And then we'll also be able to see the condition of the soft top, which I'm fearful is not great. So stand by, let's get all this taken apart. All right, we'll get the boys to help lift this off. All right, we got the soft top pulled up. This is where it all stores underneath of this tonneau cover here. So you got a big plastic plug that you got to pry out. And then right here is where the actual sending unit is that tells the gauge on the dash what the fuel level is. So we got to find the right size socket for this. We'll get this pulled out carefully to be careful not to break the tank. It looks like there's a little bit of rust in there. We'll get this taken apart and then we can look down inside the tank. All right, we're back in here. I had to call in a favor with a friend of mine. 46 millimeter. This is bigger than anything that I had. So let's see if we can get this out of here without breaking something. She's turning, that's a good sign. Let's see if we can use the ratchet. That's the fuel level sensor, like I said. Should be able to hear a float inside of here that tells you the level in the tank up on the gauge. All right, we're gonna get our bore scope and look down inside the tank. You can already see it's a little bit rusty. All right, so I got that fuel level sensor out of there. Got a Harbor Freight Icon scanner. It's the first time I've used this. Comes with a bore scope, and we'll be able to look down inside the fuel tank and take some photos. And you might not be able to see it on camera, but it's not the greatest. You can see a lot of rust and other things like that in the bottom of the tank. So I guess I'm gonna try and put some old diesel fuel in there, kind of let everything soak, and then see if we can't drain it out through the bottom. Maybe even try and put a long screwdriver down inside here and kind of agitate everything to get all that rust out of the bottom of the tank. All right, I've got Garrett up on the ladder. He's got an air hose. We've got both those feed and the return lines that go from the tank up to the fuel distributor on the front. We're gonna blow these out, make sure we can hear air pressure in the back. It may blow out some gas or any kind of dirt. All right, feed line. Again. Good. Return. Again. Oh yeah, got a little bit of stuff. Go again. Again. All right, good. Thanks, Shane. All right, you can see on the bench here, I've taken apart the fuel pump. I was trying to figure out why that didn't want to work. Looks like the seal went bad and it kind of got fuel all inside the armature and everything like that. And in the meantime, I found all of this cruddy stuff that looks like dried up mud, but I do believe that was old fuel. It's kind of crazy how that stuff turns into brown dust after a couple years. All right, last time on Project SL, we got the fuel sender out. We were looking down inside the tank. We saw all the rust, all the old fuel that had accumulated down there at the bottom. I basically took a very long screwdriver, kind of mashed it around inside the tank, got a bunch of loose debris. Before we put any kind of fluid in there, I thought it was best to try and vacuum out everything we could before we tried to push it through the strainer or try to take the strainer out the bottom and risk breaking the bottom of the tank. So all I did was fashion up a piece of heater hose. It's a silicone heater hose to the end of the vacuum, stuck this down inside the tank and kind of beat it around inside of there and tried to get to all the corners, and it actually did a really good job. Now that I'm looking down inside the tank, there's no loose material there of any kind. So now we probably just put a gallon or two of gas or a gallon or two of diesel in there and just kind of let it slowly wash out everything that we have before we go underneath and put the fuel pump and the new fuel filter all back together in there. We'll make sure that we have clean fuel coming out. All right, I went underneath and put a drain pan right underneath where the drain was for the tank. It's actually the feed line. Out of the bottom of the tank is around a ½ inch line. They completely crumbled when we took it apart on the last video. So right now there's just an open hole at the bottom of the tank. We vacuumed everything out. That hole goes directly into a strainer, kind of like a screen that keeps some of those large particles from going into that actual fuel line. So I have a little bit of gas here, have a funnel. We're gonna drain this in here and see if we can't get some of that rust colored stuff out of the bottom of the tank. We're back on the bench. we put some gasoline and some diesel fuel in the tank, let everything drain out. That's kind of still air drying a little bit. The whole shop smells of gasoline and diesel fuel now. So I figured I'd come back to the bench. We got our fuel pump that came today, and we're gonna continue to mock all of this up with these banjo fittings I was telling you about. They've got copper washers you have to replace on both sides. So we can get this whole assembly mocked up, ready to go. We'll put it back in the car once we get a new feed line. This is the one that came from the bottom of the tank. So all your fuel goes into the tank, comes through this particular hose on this car, which you can see is just falling apart. So it's a good thing we kind of got under there, pulled everything out. But we got the new hose coming, should be here in a couple days. We'll have all of this ready to go, but I think I may try and start this car off of a gas can. Stay tuned for that one. So we're gonna continue to mock all of this up. If you remember on the last video, the bolts were kind of missing for this. So I think what we're gonna do here is try to enlarge the hole that is here and make this all clamps back together. You don't want the fuel pump back there just kind of moving around. So we're gonna drill out both the holes here. That way once the fuel pump is in there, we'll have a bolt and a nut to hold everything secure. Again, the fuel pump goes inside of a little protective coating to kind of dampen it from the shock and the vibrations of going down the road. Spin this in. Leave everything loose until we get it set up. So this particular hose, which is thankfully in good shape, I've made sure that air is able to blow through every single fitting from the accumulator to the filter to the pump. So we should be able to start at the bottom. We're gonna apply a little bit of anti-seize on these. Who knows who the next person will be to take this apart? Maybe one of my kids one day, but they're gonna appreciate having a little bit of anti-seize on these dissimilar metals so that everything will come back apart a little easier. On the fuel filter, again, has these copper washers. You have to put one on each side of the actual fitting. So we're gonna put one against the top of the bolt, through the fitting, and one on the back side. Again, with a little bit of anti-seize. And we'll thread that in, leaving everything loose for now. And the fuel pump, this will probably take a little bit of finagling as the bracket was bending and kind of moving as we were taking everything apart. So that goes through the last part of the fitting, have a washer, through the fitting, another washer, and the nut. Make sure that everything is in the bracket, and we should be able to this will hold everything together. All right, so I'm going to tighten up all of these fittings. We're going to leave the brackets kind of loose for now. We'll get this underneath the car and make sure that all of the other hoses line up on this side and that everything's kind of oriented the right way. Again, we're going to get that positive and negative back on the fuel pump here that's under the car. There is a big screw and a little screw, and that should kind of index off of whatever size those wires are under there. That way it only goes on one way. All right, I got everything installed, have the wires for the fuel pump, positive and negative, hooked up and tightened. I've kind of had to tweak everything to kind of get it in the bracket just right. All of the banjo bolts on the right-hand side are tightened up. We have the actual feed line that comes out of the fuel filter and goes all the way to the front of the car up to the fuel distributor. That is connected, and we've got a short piece of hose that comes over to something that's called a buffer. It's literally just hollow, I don't know what it really does. And then we've got the little tube that runs all the way back up to that accumulator that we replaced. I think that's just a drain line in case the accumulator goes bad. It doesn't just drip onto the ground, it actually goes back into the fuel system and provides pressure. So the only thing that we are missing now is the actual hose that goes up to the tank and comes back down here that actually gives us all of that fuel. I think that hose is about a week out. So in the meantime, we're gonna do something cool. I'm gonna go out and probably pull the spark plugs out, put some oil down there, and we're gonna try and turn the motor over. After seeing the condition of this fuel system, I think it's probably been more like 10 years since this car has actually run. So let's go see if the motor is actually free, or we're gonna have a whole nother set of problems and videos. One of the last remaining pieces at the back of the car for the fuel system was this pre-made hose that's got a threaded end and a regular hose end, but it's a fuel hose with an overbraid on it. This basically goes into the bottom of the tank and hooks on to the buffer tube on here. So I'm gonna hook this up, and then we're gonna fill the gas tank with about 5 gallons worth of gas, and we should be able to cycle the key and maybe see some fuel come out of those fuel lines up the front. All right, all we need is a flat blade screwdriver, and we'll get this back on the ground. So we've got about 4 gallons of gas in the gas tank, hooked up the jump box. We're gonna put these feed and return lines into this pan here. Just make sure they don't go anywhere. All right, we're gonna go cycle the key a couple times. We've got fresh fuel up here now. Presumably those lines, at least the feed line, is now flushed. Got a little bit of rust out of the line. Feeling positive about this. Well, I think that's going to do it for the first video on the Project 380 SL. We've got this fuel system pretty much hammered out. The last thing is that screen up the fuel distributor. Probably have that after the weekend, and then we can maybe see about starting it. But in the meantime, We need to get these spark plugs out. We need to get some oil in the cylinders. We need to see if this motor is going to turn over and be free. So stay tuned for that video. In the meantime, I'll leave you with these cool little trinkets. This is the old badge off the back of the car, the old Benson Annapolis car that they got bought out by Mile One Group and then became Mercedes-Benz of Annapolis. So it's pretty cool. I think we'll try and put this back on the back of the SL once she's up and running.